All right, here we go. All right, so West Coast songwriters, we are here sitting with one of my dearest friends, James Michael, who I have wanted to get involved in this organization for a long time. And sort of by the blessing of it being virtual and Poppy working super hard and getting us all connected, we have you here for a virtual interview, and it's so fun. So everybody, welcome James Michael. And we're just gonna chat today about life and music and where life has taken us now. For those of you that don't know, James and I were on the road in Sixx AM, which is a band that he is the lead singer of and the producer for and the main songwriter for, and he did so many incredible records. And the Heroin Diaries, I think, just celebrated 10 years this year, which is amazing. So anyway, James Michael is here, and we were going to start by just chatting about how you and I met, which was originally in the Bay Area where the West Coast songwriters started. So you can kind of jump in there. It was by a different name then, but you were actually involved in that organization, and it's super cool. So let's start there.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to be talking with you today. And actually, yes, I got my start because of this organization. It was back in the 90s, I guess it was early 90s. I was living in San Francisco, and a dear friend of mine, Bruce Eade, told me about this organization. And I was just kind of cutting my teeth as a songwriter and as a producer and as a singer myself. And he had already been in the organization for quite some time. And he suggested that I go to one of the song pitches where, you know, what you basically do back at the time, you'd have a cassette with one song on it, and you'd pick your favorite song, the song that you felt was the strongest song, and you'd wrap the lyric sheet around it, and you'd put a rubber band on it, and then you submit it. And so I remember, I can't remember where this was, but it was somewhere in the city, in San Francisco. I was very nervous, and I submitted my song. And it was a small publishing company that was on the panel that week. It was a company called Vis-a-Vis Entertainment, a gentleman named David Kremen and Brian Brinkerhoff. And out of all of the 30 or 40 or 50 song submissions, they chose mine, and I ended up signing a publishing deal as a result of the very first conference that I ever went to. So it was really, it was just one of those situations where I had been preparing for these type of moments for a long time, and I felt like I was confident. I had material that I thought was compelling, but I wasn't aware that there was even this type of an outlet. So when Bruce introduced me to the organization, obviously it clicked right away. And to be honest with you, I owe every bit of success that I've had in this business to that organization and to that moment when I decided to take a chance. So I am honored to be here, and I'm grateful that this organization is still going and it's still supporting songwriters and artists. And I'm just thrilled to be able to say that I'm here because of you.
It's so awesome. That is like the coolest thing. So you actually are from Michigan. I was going to say that too. And you came out, remind me, like, because I know this story, but remind me how old you were, like when you came out to California, and then you were in the Bay Area, and then you ended up in Los Angeles. And we're actually both zooming in from Los Angeles.
Right. Well, I moved out from Michigan as a 19-year-old, and I actually moved to Los Angeles first, and really just started struggling there. I joined bands. I was in a lot of different bands. I was just trying to become a rock star any way that I knew possible. And I didn't know anyone at the time. So it was definitely years of really struggling and you know, just trying to find any little glimmer of hope or trying to meet somebody that I thought could help me. Eventually, I met my at the time wife, who now is my ex-wife, but we got married and we moved up to San Francisco. So that's how I actually ended up in the Bay Area. And at the time, I was playing piano in wine bars and just trying to make any kind of living that I could. with my craft as a piano player and as a singer. And all the while I was writing songs. I started writing songs at about maybe 13 or 14. And by the time I was 15, I was showing some significant promise as a songwriter. You could tell that what I was doing was a cut above. And I think that's when I thought, well, I should give this a go, and I should move to California, and I should really, just give this my all, because it was my dream to do that. So I moved up to San Francisco, and I think very shortly after is when I met you, Melissa, because I was looking for work, and I had found a poster on a bulletin board that said, looking for a song arranger for a musical theater company. I thought, well, that's something that I can do. That's not exactly what I want to be doing. It's not rock stardom, right, but it's a start. And so I joined that theater company as the musical director, and
he was the vocal director as well. So we would show up to rehearsals, and we had this cool like Kurt Cobain looking guy that like had long blonde hair, and he was breaking down all the arrangements, and it was an amazing thing. I was 11 years old, and the thing that's so crazy is we've now known each other for 23 years or so. We've stayed connected that whole time, and I was so fascinated by it when I was a kid because he could pull all the parts out by ear, and he could just hear everything in the arrangement. And then you went to LA at some point. You had this solo record, and I think one of the most amazing things about your story is just your journey to Sixx AM, to eventually getting on the road and getting to live that dream of like rock stardom and actually being the front man of a band like that. But you had this whole incredible record you had released and created by yourself in a studio in Alameda, right? I mean, was it the Alameda house? I think so, but it was.
Yeah. I always had a home studio. I was always producing since I was very young. I won't go too deeply into this, but when I was about 13 or 14, I started writing songs. My parents also recognized that there was something there, that there was a level of skill there that I think surprised them and they thought was worth investing in. So they very quickly found a recording studio near my hometown and paid for me to go in and record a couple of the songs that I had written. And that became a regular thing because I was writing so much. So maybe every few months they were hiring out this studio, and I was going in there and working with an engineer and recording. Well, very quickly I started realizing that studios are expensive. And at the time, I didn't have any recording or production chops more than just, working on a little 4-track recorder. So I thought, I need to learn how to do all the stuff that this engineer is doing, so that my parents aren't always having to spend big money for me to be able to record these songs. Because if I keep on writing songs at the rate that I was writing them at, they're going to be broke by the time I'm, ready to leave the house. So I very quickly learned how to engineer. And so I asked the engineer at that studio, hey, the next time I come in, would you let me, sit in the cockpit and run the show? And he let me do it. And that's where I learned how to become completely self-sufficient as a producer, as an engineer, as a mixer, and as an artist.
Yeah, and it all ties back then, like in the Bay Area, you were creating, so we were doing these fully produced Broadway style musicals with no orchestra, right? So Eddie hired James to create full, basically, tracks for the shows, and they were really amazing. He would make him make all these crazy arrangements of songs, and but you really were making a full record and learning to do all these crazy orchestral arrangements too, right?
Well, there's so much to unpack about that, and I know we don't have time for all of this.
No, it's okay. It's fun.
One of the things that I wanted to mention is that I've always believed that this business is built on relationships. There is nothing more important than relationships. And I think that your and my story, Melissa, is a perfect example of that, because we met when you were just a little 11-year-old tyke, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I was just kind of faking it until I make it, and I was just using my skills to do that. And you fast forward, you know, decades later, and you and I have traveled the entire world together because of songs that I made up in a studio. But
Right.
that's all because of relationships. You became one of the singers of 6 a.m. and my vocal coach and my best friend, you know, because of relationships. And that's, and I think that that's an important thing for everyone to realize, all up and coming songwriters, is you've got to focus not only on your craft, but you've got to focus on building genuine relationships, because those always are what become turning points in your career.
Oh yeah, and I clung to James. Like I could tell that James was going to be like my mentor, and I really had like this rebellious part of me that just wanted to not pursue theater and go to Los Angeles and explore other things. And I would just bug him. I would just leave him voicemail after voicemail insisting that he needed an assistant. I just wanted to be around the studio, and that was really where you trained me to be a good studio singer. And that was the thing, was that you really are truly just like, I mean, a brilliant producer. And then on top of that, ended up becoming the singer for 6 a.m. But your first record in particular that you made on your own, Inhale, you did everything. I mean, you had a couple people come in, but you played every instrument, you produced the whole thing, you sang the whole thing. It's so cool. So people should definitely go listen to that. I'm going to plug James Michael, Inhale. It's all available on YouTube. There you go. Okay. Anyway, so moving on. So down in Los Angeles, let's talk about kind of when you got to LA and what was really, I love that your story involves struggle, you know, because I think so many people, especially in this organization, they're really chipping away and trying to figure out their place in the business. You really found a place in the rock industry, but you've written and worked for so many people. So just maybe just touching on how your journey really got going once you left, I guess, the Bay Area and came back down here.
Well, once I left the Bay Area and came back down to Los Angeles, of course, by then, because of the Bay Area and because of the organization, I had met my first publisher. So, and they were based in Los Angeles. So I decided it was time for me to be in Los Angeles, closer to my publisher, because one of the things that they were going to be doing was setting me up with co-writes, putting me in touch with other artists, with other writers, and start building relationships. So that's why I came back down to Los Angeles. And then I think it was probably in about 1999. So that was a long stretch where I was just struggling. I was just, you know, working odd jobs and you know, just doing whatever I could to make it by, while continuing to improve my songwriting abilities and my singing and my production skills and stuff. And eventually I ended up leaving that publisher. Our relationship just ended. I think our contract ended, but we remained friends. Important part of this, we remained friends, because about 3 years later, I get a call from David Kremen saying, "Hey, I'm no longer running a publishing company, but I am now working at a record label. And do you have anything that you could send me that I could listen to?" And I had just finished a demo of like 3 or 4 songs. So I sent it to him. And 3 months later, I had a record deal at this label that he was now working at. And that was where it all started. I signed my very first record deal, I believe in 1999, with a company that is no longer in existence, but at the time it was called Beyond Music. And that's what we released my first record on. Now, when we put my record out, it didn't do very well, but it was very critically acclaimed. It was a well-made record. It was a well-written record, and at the time, it was kind of unusual for artists to do everything, like produce, play all the instruments, mix it, do everything myself. So I had a little bit of an advantage in that respect. The record basically flopped, but at that record label, there was also other artists. There was Sammy Hagar, there was Motley Crue, there was Blondie. And so again, because of relationships, I started writing for all of them while I was waiting for my record to come out. So, and I, of course, at the time had huge hopes. I thought, I'll write a few songs with these artists, and then when my record drops, I'm going to become super famous and I'll be a star and I won't have to talk to anyone anymore. And of course, my record comes out and it flops. But what happened is that during the time I was waiting for my record to come out, I had ended up doing some co-writes with Motley Crue because I was a label mate, with Sammy Hagar, with Blondie, with Meatloaf, with all of these heritage, artists. And here I was just this young guy who really had no business writing with people of that stature, but they all welcomed me because I was part of that record label family.
It's so interesting that you bring up these relationships and how important they are, and it's you can't emphasize that enough.
I can't, and I will continue to drive that home because it truly is how everything happens in this business.
Well, I created a relationship with Melissa, therefore I get to sit here and have a conversation with you. So thank you.
Yeah, I love that. And so basically what happened is that while my record didn't do very well, all of a sudden something very interesting started happening. I started getting checks in the mail for all of these songs that I had written for other artists. And I was like, and when I say checks in the mail, I mean, I went from being broke to being completely fine financially within a matter of just a few months and I had no idea at the time. When I was writing with Motley Crue, I was thinking, well, this is just cool. I grew up, on Motley Crue. And now here I am writing songs with them. And I didn't really think about the implications of what that was going to mean, but that changed everything for me. All of a sudden I was like, I like this idea of being a songwriter, maybe even more than being an artist, because as an artist, you spend a lot of time, you put your heart and soul into a record, and then you maybe spend 6 months to a year recording that record, and then you spend the next 2 or 3 years touring that record. So it doesn't leave you much time to be creative during that record cycle. Whereas if you're just a songwriter, you're just sitting home and the checks are coming in, and you can be writing with a new artist every single week. So something clicked for me, and I thought, I don't want to give up artistry completely, but I really need to focus on this songwriting thing because this can be very, very lucrative, and this could actually support my desire to be a songwriter, to be an artist, which is basically exactly what happened. So, long story long. I kind of just climbed up the ranks that way. I just got as many opportunities as I could to write songs for other artists, and anytime I got the opportunity, I took it. I was just like, this is gold. This is perfect because I can sit in a room with you for one day, and then you can go travel the world for the next 2 or 3 years working that one song while I'm on to other things. So selfishly, I kind of adjusted what my plans were. So then I spent, the better part of the next decade just being a professional songwriter. And somewhere in that period of time, I made the next significant move, which was going from just being a songwriter to being a producer. And I'll tell you why that happened. Number one, I always had the skills from a very young age to be a producer. But it didn't dawn on me that was actually a whole separate career that I could and should pursue. But what happened, I remember there was a couple of artists in particular that I had ended up getting lucky enough to write songs for. And when I got the final version back, I just believed that the demo that I had made was way better than the final production that came back. So I started getting frustrated because the producers that were producing my songs weren't quite getting it. They weren't quite getting what I had in mind, how I was envisioning it. So I just thought, well, then the next natural step for me is I need to start producing these myself. So at some point in my career, I don't remember specifically when it was, but I kind of put my foot down and I started saying, you can have this song under one condition. The condition is that I produce it because I know how this song has to sound in the end. So it was.
Do you remember what your first what was your first full record that you produced for someone else? Do you remember kind of what the first big project was? Because I don't know if we've ever talked about that, but And I'm not mean to put you on the spot, but I can't. I don't know if it was a
well, there's a few answers to that. Obviously, the first full record that I produced by myself was for myself. It was Inhale. I mean, there were a couple prior to that, but I don't think they're even significant enough to mention. And then I did some co-production on a Meatloaf song because Meatloaf happened to be at one of my gigs one night, and which was thrilling for me.
The story is actually very funny, right?
Yeah.
He's so funny. You have to tell the story.
Okay, so I'd done a show, I think it was at the House of Blues or something here in LA, and Meatloaf happened to be in the audience. And the next day, I get a call from Meatloaf, and he's like, "Hey, James, I was at your show last night. Do you mind if I give you some notes?" And he proceeded, he had written down pages of notes of suggestions and ideas for me as a performer and as a songwriter and stuff. And I was just in awe, because I'm thinking, this is just so bizarre. You know, why? Number one, why is he taking an interest in me? And number two, I'm getting advice from one of the greatest performers ever. And so we just became fast friends. Another relationship that mattered a lot over the following years.
He really loved you a lot.
He really did, and he was a total champion of mine. And he's a sweet man, and a very special person. And you know, as with many people, I owe him a great deal. But yeah, he was one of the first kind of real big artists to take notice of me. And before you knew it, I was writing songs for Meatloaf, and he was saying that I was the next Jim Steinman, which was flattering, of course, and it wasn't true, but it was certainly flattering.
Those of us that don't know, who is that?
Jim Steinman is an incredible songwriter who wrote all of Meatloaf's big hits.
Okay, I didn't actually know that, so I want to know the name,
sure.
just because I did not know. So this is my own ignorance in the song.
No, that's fine.
But,
so anyway, so my career kind of continued on like that, with really wonderful, unusual, special people coming into my life, and you know, and either being a champion for me or you know, providing me with an outlet for my songs. So you know, again, I stress that whole idea of how important it is to be aware of the relationships that you have and nurture them, and just be as genuine as you can, because it does come back around. And I've found that over the years, you know, I've made great friends in this industry, and you know, I'm at a place in my career and in my life now because of all of these great people who have taken an interest over the years.
And I think it's cool because, you know, going back to you becoming a producer as well, we'll talk about Sixx AM and that kind of changing how your life went, I guess, and where you ended up going in terms of being a singer as well. Because I think you always say this, which I think is hilariously crazy, but you always say, I never considered myself a singer, and you just happen.
I'm not a singer. I'm not a singer.
I know, that is just so insane. So like anybody that goes and listens to a Sixx AM record, they're just gonna be like, screw this.
I have to say, my son now has you on the playlist because
I love it.
He heard me. You've got some great workout songs for me, and so he put it on his playlist. So
good.
Yeah, and the cool thing is, like, you know, James, you ended up like producing just with a lot of bands that I grew up like Papa Roach. You know, these are bands that I grew up listening to, and you know, my boyfriend loved Shinedown, and he couldn't believe, like, you've written with all these people, worked with all these people, and then eventually toured with all these people. You know, which is so. It's just like how it all worked in your life. So it kind of started with, you know, Motley Crue, and yes, you had met Nikki, but it was really that Heroin Diaries was gonna be something that you weren't even gonna sing on, you know, right? Like, can you kind of tell that story of how you becoming the singer of Sixx AM? Because again, Sixx AM would not be Sixx AM without you being the singer, not only writing all the songs, but you singing those songs and you writing those songs.
Well, I think that there's an important message in this particular story, and this I would say to every single songwriter or artist that is, you know, trying to build a career right now, nothing ever happens the way you planned it to. But if you are willing and able to roll with the changes, you can build an incredible career. I've not only had the most exciting and unusual and special and happy life, but an incredible career that has happened entirely unplanned. You know, I was prepared for it at every turn, but I could have never imagined the way in which things have happened. And 6 a.m. is a perfect example of that. I was at the time I was I was producing the Scorpions, actually. I produced a record with Desmond Child for the Scorpions called...
For the record, this is when I started working for you at 19 years old as your personal assistant in Los Angeles, right?
That's right,
so I got to hang out around the Scorpions, and it was a very odd first experience around the rock industry, but it was super cool. Anyway,
it was really cool. It was really cool.
Cool.
So I was in the middle of producing that record, and I got a call from Nikki, who by now Nikki Sixx and I were friends because I had written some Motley Crue songs, and we had built a really nice friendship and relationship together, and we knew that we wanted to continue writing and creating music together in some form. We just didn't know how. So in the middle of producing the Scorpions record, he called me and he said, "Hey, I'm thinking about that idea that we had a few years ago. We'd come up with this idea to write songs and create a soundtrack to his book, The Heroin Diaries. And then we'd kind of thought that was a neat idea, and then nothing really happened with it. Well, a couple of years later, he calls me and said, "Hey, you remember that idea we had to create a soundtrack to this book?" I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I've got a guitar player now, and I'm thinking maybe now is the time to do that. Are you available?" And I said, "I can do it when I'm done producing the Scorpions record. I'll be done in a few weeks." So when I was finished with it, I went out to his place, and the three of us sat together, me, Nikki, and DJ sat together, and we just had guitars, and we started kind of just tossing around some ideas. And very quickly, we realized there's something special here. There's a dynamic here. There's a chemistry here that is probably most likely more than just a co-writing situation. I think there's something more here. We're really vibing off of each other. Well, fast forward, 6 months, and we had written an album. That album became the Heroin Diaries soundtrack. And at the time, I was just a writer and a producer. I was just going to help them get these songs to the point where they're ready to go find a singer, and then they can go out and be a band. Well, as you know, I have a pretty broad vocal range, and I was recording these songs with these very elaborate melody lines. And when it came time for us to audition singers, we were just like, I don't think we're going to find anybody, that can sing all of these songs this way. So Nikki said, "Would you mind just leaving your voice on these? And that's all you have to do. Just leave your voice on them, and it'll be fine. We'll take care of the rest." I'm like, "No, that's fine." Next thing you know, we get a call from the record label saying, "You've got a hit song. This song, Life is Beautiful, is climbing the charts really fast. We need you guys to make a video." So Nikki calls me again. He's like, "Hey, I know I said you didn't have to do anything else with this band, but would you mind being in a video too?" I was like, "Okay, I'll be in a video." So I kind of reluctantly backed my way into being the front man of 6 a.m. I never wanted to do it, but at some point, we just decided that what we had was working so well. Why tamper with that? Why try to introduce another factor to this that may not work? So that's how I became the frontman of 6 a.m. And here we are, 5, 6 albums later with the greatest hits coming out. And we have a song climbing the charts right now today. So all of that because of, just these unusual circumstances that were never planned, that I never had any intention of doing. But here I am with a career built almost entirely around 6 a.m.
Yeah, and then it was amazing because, 6 a.m. was never planning to tour, and then eventually Motley Crue did a festival called the Crue Fest, and you guys went out the first time, and you realized how difficult it was to sing those songs live.
Good. Good.
Right? And that's one of the amazing things because, by the time we went out and toured, it was cake, for you. You really, are just you are truly, like, for anybody that doesn't know 6 a.m.'s repertoire, because I'm sure there are people at West Coast Songwriters watching this that
most people don't know 6 a.m.'s repertoire. Let's
and
just stipulate that.
but the thing I think is so great about this is we need a little more rock and roll, like, in terms of, like, getting into this world, because this is a very booming world of musicians. Like, all of the guys we've toured with and all of the amazing bands we got to be out on the road with, and we won't spend too much time talking about that, but we got to see some incredible music and stuff when we were out there.
That's true. And I will also say this, which probably a lot of songwriters don't know, is that the rock genre is very, very open, if not dependent on outside songwriters now. It didn't used to be that way, but it very much is now. When you hear of rock bands signing record deals and going into the studio to make records, there is always a period of time prior to going into the studio where their A&R people at their record label are hooking them up with songwriters. And there's an entire category of rock songwriters that's what they do. You know, the Marty Fredrickson,
Yeah.
Scott Stevens, Blair Daly. There's a lot of really, really gifted songwriters that aren't necessarily artists themselves, but they know how to get in a room with a band and kind of become that fifth member.
Well, and that's also the thing that's truly one of your gifts, you know, I would say is, you know, James, as you are such a wonderful singer, in the sense that your voice is so vulnerable and so emotional and all those things, but you're able to get that out of artists when you work with them.
I have a real advantage. Part of my brand as a producer very early on was I became the fixer. I became a guy that could work with the most difficult bands and get them to the finish line. And I think that the reason for that is because I am an artist myself. And I understand the insecurities and the ego that clash in any band situation, in most creative situations. And as a producer, I have a bit of a natural ability to help navigate your way through the egos and through the insecurities to get to a place where you are delivering your best self to not only the recording but to your audience. That's my job as a producer. And so very early on, I realized that was one of my strengths. And I will say this too, just as a little side note: whether you are just aspiring to be a songwriter, or whether you want to be a singer, songwriter, artist, whether you want to be a producer, an engineer, a mixer, whatever it is, play to your strengths. Understand what your brand is, not what you want your brand to be. Take what you want your brand to be, put that over here and keep on working on that, but make sure that your brand is completely reflective of what you are good at. If you are just a lyricist, then brand yourself just as a lyricist. And if you are just a melody writer, or if you're just kind of more of the track builder, brand yourself as that. Because we in the industry, when we're looking through our Rolodex, when I've got a band in the studio and they need help with a song and I'm not able to, or I don't have the time to write with them, I'm looking through my Rolodex very specifically. Oh, I need somebody that's really strong with lyrics. I'm going to Blair Daly for that, or I need somebody that can really pump up the music, and really, as a musician, I'm going to go to Scott Stevens or Marty Fredrickson for that. And so brand yourself as what you are, not what you want to be. And then keep on working to grow that part that has not quite developed yet.
And then what would you say, like, just to kind of wrap up talking about 6 a.m. and stuff a little bit, but what would you say was, I mean, I know what I think was special about it, but even just as you got to tour and take the music out, because we did get to, I guess we could say our timeline for touring really, when we did iHeartRadio and we had started 6 a.m., it was probably around 2014, I guess, when we started really the world tours. And you got to travel the world as the lead singer of that band, which was something that was not planned at all to get to happen.
Every moment of that was an absolute gift. I have so many vivid memories of being on stage in some random, like, at
Budokan, Japan.
Budokan, Japan, or Sweden Rock Fest, or whatever it is, and and having, 80,000 people singing songs that I made up in this room here back to me. Those are just gifts that I will never, ever, that will never leave my heart for the rest of my life. I'm just so grateful for those. And they were unexpected. And I had given up my dreams of being a rock star many years before. And here's a little interesting fact. As a songwriter, I had hits throughout the last few decades. So I was familiar with that experience. But as an artist, I didn't have my first hit song until I was 40 years old as an artist.
Yes.
So I think that can give some of you hope.
6 years.
That you just never give up. And there are, you can always break the rules, and you can always break the trends and prove everybody wrong. And if it's in your heart and you're determined and you're committed, you can do that. Just stay with it.
Well, I thought it was interesting too how you said that there are so many rock bands looking for songwriters. And that's not something I've heard recently. We do these song screenings once a month where people can be, getting feedback from somebody in the industry. And most of the time they're saying, it's hard to find a place in TV, film, or commercial for rock. Well, what about the bands? So it'll be interesting to take that into what I'm doing for the members as far as the screenings go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's I think that because the music industry has changed so dramatically over the last couple of decades, record companies realized, how important it is to have well-structured hit songs. And what better way to guarantee yourself the best shot at getting those well-structured hit songs, but to bring in professional, professional songwriters that know how to structure it. Not that bands don't. And I don't want to paint the picture that every single rock band now is incapable of creating their own art. But record companies feel it's very important to buy themselves some insurance. And the way they buy themselves insurance is by sending their bands off to write with professional songwriters. Happens every single day. I get calls all the time. Hey, I've got this new band I just signed. They're great, but they need their songs to be punched up a little bit. Are you able to get in with them?
Right. Or you just have situations where you've written, like, just for example, because we haven't mentioned this yet, you have a great song that you happen to have written with someone and it gets in the hands of a Kelly Clarkson. Like James has a great song that Kelly Clarkson sang years ago. And that's sort of a different scenario. It's like there's a lot of different scenarios, but again, that's all relationships too, isn't it?
I was just going to say it's different, but the one thing is that
constant.
I ended up with a song on Kelly Clarkson's greatest hits album, Chapter 1, a song called People Like Us, because one of the people that I wrote it with had a great relationship with Kelly Clarkson's musical director. And next thing you know, I end up with a hit song with Kelly Clarkson. Right. So again, relationships. So
let's talk, kind of moving into where we are now in the world, because life is so different now. And, James, like we've said, is you're one of my oldest and dearest friends, but we've also gone through kind of a hellish post-tour experience. There's been a lot of changes in the world and in life. And, we both got dogs and we both kind of stopped touring and doing other things. But how has the world changed in music? And, how do you feel about the music industry now? Because I think a lot of our people, a lot of people are struggling, we know, not just about COVID, but just how has the music industry changed, do you think? And I know that's a very general question, but there's a lot of stuff right now.
I mean, sadly, right now, I assume that you're kind of referring to COVID. How has it changed because of COVID?
Kind of all of it, yeah.
In obvious ways, the touring industry has been brought to its knees. It's completely halted. And as we all know, touring is probably the biggest aspect of an artist's career now. It is where an artist makes almost all of their money. So yes, of course, because of COVID, that's not happening right now. So the struggle is just compounded now. I mean, the reality is this, and I think that all of us on this call can agree to the fact that in general in the music business, struggle is just inherent in what we do. You know, we are all kind of struggling because we're all waiting. You're only as good as your last gig, and we're all looking for that next song cut, or that next record deal, or that next, you know, hit song, or whatever it may be. So we're always, even the successful ones are in a state of kind of sustained struggle at all times. So because of COVID, I think it's evened out the playing field across the rest of industries. But I think us here in the song, in the music industry, we're already so familiar with what that struggle feels like. You know, what is my next move? What do I do? So I think that in some respects, of course, COVID has changed things dramatically. Records aren't being released because tours aren't happening. Tours aren't happening because, you know, the promoters can't get insurance. You know, it's just everything is unraveling in a way that is not good. You know, it's just, let's just be honest, it's not good. But during these times, I think that us as creative artists and as songwriters, we have to go back to what we are really already good at doing, which is struggling and creating at the same time. We have to be okay with where we're at, take advantage of this time. I spent the first 3 months of COVID, I didn't step foot in my studio. Now, of course, I have the luxury to be able to not step in my studio for a few months. So that's a little unfair. But at some point, I started going, wait a second here. I'm not retired yet. I'm still a pretty young dude that's got a lot of cool ideas in me yet. So I finally got back in the studio. And once I got back in the studio, I was like, why did I not do this from the minute COVID started? Because right now, phones aren't ringing as much. You know, there's less distractions. And so I started creating, I'm making a record right now. I'm making a new solo project right now that I probably wouldn't have done had COVID not happened. So, you know, take it, and of course it's terrible, and my heart breaks for the entire world as far as the struggle that's happening. The human struggle that's happening right now everywhere is just unbearable. But in my small little world here, I'm finding ways to take advantage of it. And I think that a lot of songwriters are. I think that a lot of songwriters are just kind of moving forward, doing what they do because they're already used to the phone not ringing, you know?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's like, it's so uplifting, and I think that's what we need right now. And so I'm so excited that we got to talk about all of it. And I think wrapping up, I just wanted to ask I guess like your kind of big advice for all of the musicians out there. And we've already said a lot of really amazing things about relationships and the different things and what you just said, I think is kind of the key, is just getting people inspired right now during this time.
Yeah.
And what do you feel like, I mean, is that a weird question? What keeps you inspired when you're in the studio and when you have roadblocks and you hit those roadblocks? Like, what do you do to keep yourself inspired? I think that's something we've had come up a lot as a theme in a lot of our conversations with people.
I think that's a good question. And my answer is probably going to be a little bit cheesy, but it's sincere. And that's, remind yourself to dream, you know, remind yourself to have dreams and to believe in the impossible. And, you know, when you get into the studio and you start creating, just think of the best possible case scenario for this thing that you're creating and believe in that, and let that motivate you to see it through to its completion. You know, I think that you especially in these times, you do have to dare to dream, just understanding that, as in many cases like mine, the end result, the career that you end up with, is probably going to be nothing at all like you imagined it being. It's probably going to be way better because you're going to meet a lot of people, and you're going to build relationships, and you're going to see things and experiencing things, both great things and difficult things. But just realize that you know, you can only control so much. You can control your confidence, you can control your belief in yourself, and as long as you stay focused on what your dreams are, then you're doing everything that you can. A lot of it is just up to chance, and it is just up to luck, but make sure that make sure you're doing all those things. Make sure you're very aware. When somebody comes into your life, stop and pay attention. Pay attention to who they are, because they may end up being a very significant person in your life down the road, or you may never see them again. You just don't know, but pay attention.
Yeah, I love that. You're just the best. And I think people are just going to get so much out of this because you're just so kind and so gracious. And to wrap it up, like, I think that's also been a theme that we've talked about a lot over the last few years, is also just be a part of the No Assholes Club. Be kind to everybody, you know, and work with kind people, and know who to welcome into your circle, and get vulnerable and share your work. And you've always been that way for me as a friend. And it's just,
I've always said that it's so important to be kind and be genuine and be good, because you know that saying, nice guys finish last? That may be true, but that means that nice guys last the longest.
Right. That's true.
Well, I so appreciate that. You know, that's basically been my motto for this last year, is that everybody that I meet and work with, I want to be able to enjoy working with, and taking care of those relationships, you know, getting to know Melissa better over the last year, different people in the circle that have showed up, John Berger out in New York, and, you know, making sure that people feel valued. That you're not just trying to climb something. It's like, no, I actually want to build a world around me that I want to be in. So I really appreciate hearing that from you. Yeah.
Can I tell one more story that I really love? And it's exactly to this point. I was doing Melissa and I were doing a podcast last year. And we did one episode where we had fans just call in from anywhere around the world. And this young gentleman called in. I believe he was from Spain at the time, Emiliano, and he was an aspiring, you know, producer, engineer, songwriter, and he just called, very kind, lovely human being, and he just had some really good questions for me about how to get started. Well, I'll tell you what, he and I stayed in touch. He came to LA. We ended up hanging out. I brought him into the studio, brought him into projects. He's produced songs for artists on my record label. He just got nominated for a Grammy this year. So that is a perfect example of how being a good person and keeping yourself open to any and all people that you meet can lead to really great things.
Mm-hmm. That's so awesome. You're the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much. And, you know, we look forward to seeing you more around West Coast Songwriters.
I look forward to that too. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to us all doing this in person again sometime, maybe next year or whenever it may be. But yes, I'm excited to do more with you guys. I love what you're doing. It's the greatest thing. And like I said, I literally would not be here. I would not have the career that I have if it wasn't for you guys.
Well, that's so awesome. And everybody just go check out, you know, everything James has done. He's on the, not that he uses it often, but he is on the Instagram at James Michael Official. You know, he's on there sometimes, but he's around and working on projects, and just go check out all the stuff he's done. And we hopefully can get some classes or something fun going in LA and something. So we'll wrap it up there.
Yeah, I want to thank both of you so much. Thank you to Melissa. Melissa's going to be working really hard the day of the conference. I have her scheduled in lots of boxes. But I know she has the energy. And so I just want to tell everyone to go off, check everything out else out on the program today. And thank you to you both again. I'm just going to pause there. Yay.